You are tuned into WRPS Rockland. I am your host, Seth Rosczewski, and in studio today, we have a very special guest with us. I am honored to introduce Senator John Keenan. Senator, it's a pleasure. Thank you for coming in today.
Me. Thanks, Seth. I appreciate it.
So, with the world of sports betting, are there any updates or changes in the House that we should be looking for?
Well, we filed a bill this session that will address some of the sports betting issues. What we've found is that since sports betting was legalized, the amount being wagered on sports betting has increased pretty steadily. And as that has increased, the public health concerns have increased as well. We are finding that more and more people are struggling with addictive gambling behavior. And there isn't really a support, there aren't really supports in place right now to address that. We know how to address alcohol dependency and addiction. We've gotten better over the years with addressing opioid addiction by offering programs and recovery programs of that sort. We're not ready for sports betting and what we're seeing out there. In fact, on my ride over here today, I heard on the radio that how the number of internet searches have increased related to sports betting addiction and sports betting problem gambling habits. And so it's out there. People are betting an awful lot. They're betting more frequently. It's becoming a problem, and for many, it's becoming addictive. And so the bill that we filed is going to try to address or rein in sports betting a little bit. We're not going to try to ban it. We're not going to try to outlaw it. It's passed, so it's there. But one of the things that really draws people to it is in-game bets, prop bets, where they can bet beyond the game. They can bet on whether somebody's going to score so many three-pointers, whether the next play is going to be a touchdown, whatever it may be. They're prop bets, they're instantaneous, and they are highly addictive. So we're looking to prohibit prop bets during games. We're looking to prohibit advertising that occurs during games as they try to draw people in, enticing them with parlays through and other types of bets that they can make through their phones. We're trying to limit the advertising beyond in-game advertising, trying to make it less deceptive. Right now, you see on TV or you hear on the radio an advertisement that suggests you can't lose. No sweat bet. Bet $5, get $200 in credits. It's really designed to lure people in. And one of the things that we have learned and heard about specifically from people who are in recovery is the use of what they call hosts. Hosts are people who are employed by the industry, and they earn their pay based on what they get a person to bet. And so if somebody's struggling with being a dependent or addictive gambler, somebody who's addicted, they may be contacted, even if they've tried to quit, by a host saying, hey, we haven't heard from you in 2 or 3 days. How things going? We haven't heard from you in a week. Have you heard about the line in the Celtics game tonight? They try to entice people to bet more than they might otherwise be comfortable betting. And they give them rewards. I heard from a person who ended up being the front row of a Philadelphia 76ers game and went on the court afterwards to meet Joel Embiid, the star of the Sixers. He got that through a sports betting company, even though he had been in recovery. They reached out to him, they enticed him with this, he relapsed, went to the game, had to tell his wife what was going on, and then thankfully got back into recovery. So there's just a whole host of things that we're focusing on. And the other one, to get the state better, give them a better ability to address addictive gambling, is to increase the tax that's charged to the operators, not the individual bettors, but to the sports betting companies. In Massachusetts, we charge a rate of 20%. And in 3 or 4 states around us, it's as high as 51%. So we're going to try to match the tax rate that other states are charging, with the idea that we then use that money, those funds that are come in through that, to help us with how we're going to handle this public health crisis. And it is becoming a crisis.
What rules have been filed for the Massachusetts State Senate that have been passed or are looking to get passed?
So every 2 years we start a new session, and we spend some time crafting the rules that will govern our session during the course of the following 2 years. And we have Senate rules that govern how we as a Senate will operate, and then we have joint rules that govern how we will operate in conjunction with the House of Representatives. So the Senate rules cover everything on how you speak when you're in the body, how committees will be chosen, how committees will report out bills to the Senate before they go to the House, especially if it's just a Senate committee. This covers a whole range of topics. I've tried to make it as open and transparent as possible. For instance, we are one of a few, if not the only state Senate that allows full remote participation. So members do not have to come to the Senate chamber to debate legislation or to vote on legislation. And I think we lose a whole lot because of that. We don't have the interactions that we need between colleagues when they run into each other and say, hey, what are you going to do on this amendment? Or do you plan on speaking? How's that bill that you filed working out? Do you need any help on that? Can I be assistance? Or I might ask somebody, I need your support on this bill. Would you consider it? Let's get together and chat about it. You lose all of that when you're participating remotely. So one of the rules change that we proposed was that in order to vote in a formal session, you have to be in the Senate chamber. If you are sick, caring for a family member that's sick, if you are disabled, things like that, then you have an excuse not to be there. But the default should be, the rule should be that you're there to vote. Also, one of the rules that we focused on was, and you hear a lot about this in Washington, D.C., are elected representatives using their position and the information they gain in that position for financial gain. Are they using the information they get to buy stocks, to sell stocks, to make money? And the rule that we've had governs individual legislators not using the information they get for the purchase of stocks for financial gain. So what we proposed as a rule, and it was adopted, is that it not only would apply to a senator, a representative, an elected official, it would apply to the family members as well. What's the difference in whether I get information and trade on it, or if I'm prohibited from doing it, I go home and I tell my wife and say, hey, go out and let's buy this particular stock. So we looked to extend the rule so that it covers immediate family members, and it covers not only the purchase of stocks, but the sale of stocks, whatever it may be, for financial gain or to prevent financial loss. And I think that's just an important kind of transparency item for the Senate. So we tried to focus on those things. And the last one I'll touch on is roll calls. At one point, about 8 years ago, we had over 600 roll calls during a legislative session. We're down to about 240. And part of that's because we've become more efficient. But as we become more efficient, we've gotten in the habit of having these bigger bills that bring in a bunch of small bills, and so we vote on one bill. And I think that denies the people who vote for us the opportunity to know where we stand on individual pieces of legislation. And so my proposal was that we encourage roll calls through a bunch of different ways by making sure that they come before us and that we have to say yes or no. And we do that by making sure that we do them in what they call formal sessions. And so those are the types of things that we worked on in terms of rules. Some of them passed, some didn't, but we'll continue to try to make it more transparent and open and make us more accountable to the voters.
Are there any new bills that are in the works or are looking to get picked up or even discussed about?
Overall, this session we have over 6,000, nearly 7,000 bills that have been filed. Between the Senate and the House, there's 40 members of the Senate and 160 members of the House. So when you have people filing a couple dozen bills, it adds up pretty quickly. In my office, we file 47 bills that cover a wide range of topics. You mentioned sports betting. That's one of them. We have several behavioral health bills that we're focusing on. We have several substance use bills that we're focusing on. We will end up, I'm sure, during the course of the next 2 years, filing bills that are of local interest to make sure that anything that's needed at the local level. For instance, here in Rockland, we had filed a bill last session that would have allowed Rockland to come out of civil service because the town is having difficulty hiring, particularly firefighters. We filed the bill, and then ultimately we passed an economic development bill. And what was included in there was language that said, if you've filed a bill to remove a community from civil service to help with their hiring process, then all they have to do, rather than go through the legislative process, is notify the state, and that would have to be done by the select board, by the town administrator, and then the fire chief. And so Rockland had an issue about hiring firefighters. They couldn't attract firefighters because of the paramedic requirement and because of the issues with civil service. So we were able to file a bill that ultimately made its way to the governor's desk that makes it a lot easier for Rockland to hire firefighters. And so things like that come up all the time during the course of a session, and we file those and try to move those through as quickly as possible.
Sure. What is the status of the emergency shelter program?
We, both the House and the Senate, within the last week, have voted on a supplemental budget bill of $425 million to fund the EA system going forward until the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30th. And it's important to point out a couple things as they relate to the EA system, the Emergency Assistance Shelter Program. One, right now, about 65% of those who are applying for shelter are Massachusetts residents, short-term, long-term, and about 35% are migrants. And that number is changing by the week. Fewer and fewer migrants are applying for the Emergency Assistance Program, and more Massachusetts residents are. We know why migrants are here. We've tried to address that problem. It reached a crisis stage a little over a year ago. But now we're in the situation where they're Massachusetts residents, the majority of them coming into the system. They come into the system for a few reasons. One, they may be victims of domestic violence. They may have just been kicked out of a housing situation. They may have lost a job and can't afford to stay in the apartment or the home where they were and find themselves in need of shelter. They also could live in an apartment where the building has been sold and the new buyer puts up the rents and the person can no longer afford it. So we have a lot of those people tied to personal circumstance with housing, but also tied to the extremely high cost of housing here in Massachusetts, who find themselves in need of shelter. So we provided an additional $425 million to the program. It's very expensive. We can't sustain it. This will get us through the end of the fiscal year. And over the course of the next couple of months, we will continue to look at the shelter program, make improvements, make sure that it's accountable to the taxpayers, meaning that money's not being wasted, making sure that the people who are in the program have been properly vetted and that they are not a risk to themselves or to others or to the public at large. So a lot of those, I guess, improvements are in the works, and we will continue to look at everything as it moves forward.
Sure. Are there any new developments or changes in the MBTA Communities Act?
So it was challenged by the town of Milton, most of note, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Judicial Court, and the court said that it is constitutional. However, the state didn't put regulations in place properly. They didn't follow the proper procedure. So the court said the MBTA Communities Act stands as legal, but the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities has to go back and rework the regulations. So the whole purpose of this was to encourage communities, or require communities actually, to zone around transit hubs to allow multifamily housing as of right. Doesn't require a town to provide the infrastructure, doesn't require a town to do anything other than zone. And then developers will make a decision whether they want to come into a town, take advantage of this new zone. But if they do, and the town's not equipped to meet the demands of a new development, the town can say, no, you can't. For instance, in Rockland, there's been a couple of proposals. And the town has said, hey, we don't have the water and sewer infrastructure to support that. So under the MBTA Communities Act, even though it's been zoned for that, if the town can't provide the water and sewer, there's no obligation to grant a permit to the developer. The developer would have to figure that out on their own.
Mm-hmm. And has there been any progress or updates with the MBTA?
It's going well, better than it was. I'm a pretty regular MBTA rider. I don't take the commuter rail. I know a lot of people down in this area take the commuter rail. I take the red line. It's gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
With the track work that they did during the month-long closure, the commute is much faster. So anybody driving from Rockland to Abington, Hanover, Holbrook, towns that I represent down here that go up to Braintree and get on the red line, they will find that the ride from Braintree to Downtown Crossing or Park Street or all the way to the other end in Cambridge is a lot faster than what it used to be. My son and I kind of have this running thing where he takes the train, I take the train, and we come home and talk about, hey, how was your commute? How long did it take? And my wife would say, what's wrong with you two? Is that all you think about is how long the red line's taking these days? And I kiddingly said, well, we'll put it on the whiteboard on the refrigerator every day to compare our commute times. But it's gotten a lot better. It's much more reliable. It's a lot faster. Speeds are increasing. Frequency of trains are increasing. But there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure that this progress continues. And the big issue over the next couple of years for the communities that are a little further away and not on the subway system, but on commuter rail, will be the contract for the commuter rail operator. The MBTA is now looking at that to determine how they want to structure it. Will they ask one entity to not only run the trains, but to also be responsible for tracks and all those types of things? Or will they split that up, that there's a company responsible for track maintenance and capital improvements, and there's a company that's responsible just for running the trains back and forth?
Senator, we are currently in a local access studio, WRPS. Is there any movement on any of the bills that have been filed to affect that would affect funding for local access stations like ourselves? Anything that would affect streaming or contracts with Xfinity and Verizon?
Sure, yeah, that's great. There has been legislation filed. There's been no movement on it yet because we're still in the early stages of the session. But there's definitely a growing awareness of the issue as more and more people transition away from cable packages. They have a mix sometimes of streaming services, which my wife takes care of all that at our house. I don't watch a whole lot of TV. But what I do like to watch when I get home, and my wife thinks this is crazy, is I like to watch local access because I like to see what's going on the licensing board, the zoning board, the planning board, the city council meetings. I feel like it just keeps me better, it makes me better informed. And there's a real risk of losing all that and losing local access as more people move away from cable and into streaming services. So what will the funding be for cable access going forward? So there's legislation that would tax streaming services and dedicate a portion of that tax to making sure that we're still able to provide good quality local programming. I just think it's so important. When you look at what's going on, and particularly in Washington, there's all kinds of issues about transparency. You go on social media, you don't know what to believe, who's reporting on what. When you turn on and you watch, for instance, what you produce here, it's real, it's local. When you have interviews like this, it's not filtered, it's out there for people. And so it is a great way for people to stay in touch with what's going on in local government and in other parts, other areas that affect their community. And the thought of losing that, I think, is scary in this day and age. And so I hope, and I will continue to advocate for legislation that puts a funding stream in place so that this type of work can continue. It's just more than ever, it's so important.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you for coming in today. That's all we got for questions. So
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
You have tuned in to WRPS TV. Thank you.